Welcome into 5-Wide Fantasy. Today we're getting to the Week 13 running back rankings, ranking the top 30 running backs for this week in fantasy football. Again, we'll be talking about pretty much every matchup and every player at the position. I'll include some players that are left out of my rankings as well. If you guys do enjoy today's video, hit that like button for me as well. If you're new to the channel, we're helping you win a fantasy football championship, so hit that subscribe button too. I know a lot of you guys have made comments of you might not agree with some of the rankings, but you appreciate that they're not really cookie cutter and we're making moves on players that aren't as much with the consensus. That's what I'm trying to do here. And as well, let me know if I missed anything from injury updates wise. I don't think there's too much other than the Jonathan Taylor situation, but let's jump into these rankings. RB1 of the week, Christian McCaffrey, as he is basically every week that he is available and healthy. I know the Eagles, obviously one of the best run defenses in the league, first in fantasy points allowed, first in run defense grade. They're 20th in EPA against the run. I was surprised to see that. I mean, I think we've seen the last couple of weeks, the Bills ran the ball effectively late in the game last week. We saw the Chiefs run the ball decently well with Isaiah Pacheco. So even with McCaffrey having the tough matchup, I'm not too worried. The RB2 for me is Travis Etienne. Here's a guy with a great matchup and a Bengals team that's really struggling offensively now with Joe Burrow out, so should leave some opportunities for Etienne to get some great volume here. Not only that, though, the Bengals have been a pretty bad run defense this season. They're 32nd in fantasy points allowed and also a bottom 10 32nd in EPA against the run and a bottom 10 unit in fantasy points allowed to the position. So pretty good matchup for fantasy running backs right now. 3, Alvin Kamara. Detroit, obviously a tantalizing defense from that rushing perspective, but that never seems to be a problem for Kamara when it comes to what he can do as a receiver, because right now Detroit's 6th in fantasy points allowed to the position, 9th in EPA against the run, but we're also looking at Michael Thomas being out, potentially Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. If all these guys are missing, Alvin Kamara could potentially get close to double-digit targets in this game. Would not shock me with the lack of weapons the Saints have behind him. 4, Bijan Robinson. It's time to start paying attention to Robinson as now a top 5 guy, regardless of matchup. And the Jets are a matchup defensively that's tough to run the ball. Like on the season, they're 9th in EPA against the run. 11th in EPA against the run. But from a fantasy points perspective, they're 25th because a lot of teams aren't, in positions where they can't run the football because the Jets have built up a lead on them. Wouldn't expect that to be different here with the Falcons and their defense being a quality unit as well. So, like Bijan, like the role he has in terms of receiving game, getting decent volume on the ground too, and if this team's going to score touchdowns, he's now getting more opportunities to be that guy over Tyler Algier. 5, Rachaad White. White is a player that anytime I get into a big match, a positive matchup and positive opportunity, I've got to move him up significantly in my rankings. I don't think he's a great running back, but his contributions in the receiving game, combine that with a positive rushing matchup, makes me very excited for him because he's 30th in fantasy, or the Panthers are 30th in fantasy points allowed to the position, 27th in EPA against the run. They're one of the worst run defenses in the league. I think the Bucs handle business in this game, and White is the RB1 in this offense that gets a significant amount of volume, and that's just super, super valuable for you at this point in the season. 6, Tony Pollard. Great matchups for me. No longer have Pollard being a top 5 guy. Seattle is definitely a great matchup. They're 29th in fantasy points allowed. They've moved now to 18th in EPA against the run after being a good unit to start the year. They've really fallen off. Pollard has had back-to-back solid weeks, which is very good. Very excited to see. I hung on to him because these matchups were just too good in the regular season. And I got a couple leagues that I have him that basically because of him, I'm still trying to battle for a playoff spot. I think Pollard can definitely help you this week with the good matchup. But again, his overall upside of being the RB1 of the week is just kind of limited because he's just not finding the end zone consistently enough. 7, Zach Moss. I don't think Jonathan Taylor's going to play with the thumb injury he sustained. They were saying that there's some serious doubt in terms of what his outlook looks like for the next couple of weeks. I don't think he plays, and Moss, we know, can be a really big benefactor of being the number 1 guy in this offense. He's looked really, really good, and they've definitely ceded his opportunities away to Jonathan Taylor, but now is the top option. Tennessee is a good run defense, 16th in fantasy points allowed, 8th in EPA against the run, but that really hasn't been a problem for Moss. Because I also remember earlier this season, he kind of torched this Tennessee team and found a double-digit, or might have been 20 fantasy points in that game. So I got no concern here. I'm definitely very high on him. 8, though, in the same game is Derrick Henry. Bounce back week for Henry, finding the end zone a couple of times, getting the football a good amount. Didn't run all that efficiently, but that's no problem here. We get into the later part of the season. He's a guy that's very tough to take down. The Colts have struggled against the run, 27th in fantasy points allowed, 24th in EPA against the run. So a good matchup here for Henry. 9, Isaiah Pacheco. Pacheco getting that Green Bay defense. If we don't see Jerick McKinnon for yet another week, that's going to help Pacheco in terms of his role and getting into the receiving game a little bit more too. 24th in fantasy points allowed are the Packers. What are they? 16th in run defense grade from PFF. So still not a good unit, just outside or just inside that bottom 10 as well in fantasy points allowed. So 10th, Raheem Mostert. I don't think we're going to see Devon Achane this week. I think the knee injury is something that's a bit concerning. I think the team is going to need to get into a spot here where they just take things as safe as possible, because this is a playoff team. This is a team that's going to be playing in January, and he can certainly help them with his explosive abilities in the run game. So I'm expecting Mostert to be the top option here. And even with Jeff Wilson healthy, Mostert is still getting the opportunities when this team gets into the red zone, not Wilson, even though it was different last season. So I'm going to be playing off of that. Wilson will still get some touches. Washington, a pretty good matchup, 21st in fantasy points allowed to the position, 23rd in EPA against the run. So I think a good opportunity here for the run game that was okay last week. Mostert kind of struggled, especially in the first half. Definitely an opportunity for a bounce back here. 11, Kyren Williams. Talked about him last week. I said if he's going to be back, he's definitely going to take all the opportunities here. That's exactly what happened. Cleveland, though, a tough matchup. I still think Williams with his volume and opportunity, and especially the red zone, if you look at this Rams team, when they get inside the opponent 10-yard line, they love to run the ball. Williams, obviously, with the touchdown numbers, huge benefactor. But Cleveland, 13th in fantasy points allowed, 2nd in EPA against the run, so it will be tough sledding here for this offense, but that really doesn't seem to be a problem for Kyren Williams week in and week out, because the receiving game is also a place where he's been able to produce too. Closing out the top 12 of my RB1s on the week, David Montgomery. I'm seeing too many people listing Jahmyr Gibbs ahead of Montgomery in rankings week by week. Like, what else do you need to see? David Montgomery's the guy that's going to score the touchdowns. David Montgomery's the guy with the edge and the rushing opportunities. Yes, Gibbs can play a role in the receiving game, but there is some competition there between Laporta, St. Brown. We're seeing Jameson Williams' role grow a little bit too. So Montgomery is my top option in this offense. Not to say you shouldn't be playing Jahmyr Gibbs, but I still think David Montgomery is like a top 12 back for this Lions team, that when they find the red zone, when they're looking to score, Montgomery is that guy. But the Saints, not an easy matchup, 12th in fantasy points allowed, 12th in run defense grade from PFF, so not exactly an easy opportunity for Montgomery. Okay, to our RB2s this week. Austin Eckler, my RB13, getting New England's defense. New England's the number 1 defense in EPA against the run, so they are a good unit. But again, this is a team led by Mac Jones and can't effectively move the football down the field and score points. So the Chargers will be in a game script that's going to help them here. So I think Eckler will still be a viable option, and the opportunities here for scoring touchdowns, because New England's pass defense has not been good. So I think the Chargers can get down the field, and Eckler will convert those opportunities. But man, Austin Eckler, completely fallen off. Very glad the Chargers didn't pay him, because he is not looking deserving of very much money. Tough for him, but I think a good move by the team. 14, Ramondre Stevenson. Getting this Chargers matchup is a great one for basically all offensive players. On the season, though, the Chargers have been better against the run than they have been in the past. 20th in fantasy points allowed to the position, but 29th in EPA against the run. You can still find success. Stevenson gets great volume because of their lack of quality quarterback play. So I definitely feel like Stevenson's going to be a great start for you this week, and he's getting those goal line red zone opportunities that I thought Zeke would get, but he was not getting last week, as Stevenson found the end zone. 15, DeAndre Swift. Tough matchup. We're getting the San Francisco defense, 2nd in fantasy points allowed to the position. And you look at the way the Eagles offense scores their points. That tush-push has stolen so many touchdowns from DeAndre Swift. When you look at what Miles Sanders did last year compared to what Jalen Hurts is doing in the red zone for this team this year, it sucks for Swift, because with this offense, you'd expect this running back like Swift to be able to benefit in a huge way. Still a good start each week, but the upside could be infinitely higher. He could be an easy league winner if he was scoring a few touchdowns. So the matchup here makes it a little bit more difficult for me, but still expect the Eagles to be in a spot with this offensive line to run the ball decently effectively. 16, Breece Hall. Atlanta defense, very, very good against the run. 4th in fantasy points allowed, 2nd in run defense grade, 5th in EPA against the run as well. Hall is going to get a litany of opportunities. Receiving game, rushing game. He's going to be the guy that kind of stirs the pot for this offense, moves things effectively. It's going to be in the run game. It'll be tough to do so in this one. Hall is still a good start because of his opportunities and his volume. but I don't expect to get a huge performance from him with this defensive matchup. So that's why I've got him more as that middle-of-the-road RB2. 17, Javonte Williams, getting the Houston defense that has vastly improved this season. They're 12th in EPA against the run, so a pretty solid unit, right in the middle of the road, 17th in fantasy points allowed to the position. So I think if we're going to see Denver get into the scoring areas, you're going to see Williams being the benefactor. His rushing volume is solid if he's healthy, which I expect that back injury not to be a huge concern. I would expect him to play this week. So definitely a solid little RB2 for you in a week with a lot of bye weeks as well. 18, Najee Harris. So I've seen a few other rankings with Warren ahead. I struggle with the thought of doing that because I think this is a great matchup for the Steelers to finally put some points on the board, and Harris was the guy that they went to when they were looking to score this past week, and he's getting a little bit more of the volume and opportunity in the rushing game. So Arizona, great matchup, 31st in fantasy points allowed to the position, 32nd in run defense grade from PFF. A good matchup, and this is where I would slot the Steelers running backs in good matchups because for Harris, I don't think he's a super talented player. He just gets the benefit of getting a good amount of opportunities. 19, Jahmyr Gibbs. New Orleans defense, we talked about being a tough one. Gibbs is a talented player, a talented runner, and then as well a great receiver. So I expect some involvement there with maybe a little bit more trouble running the football against this New Orleans defense. So feel pretty solid about Gibbs. 20, Devin Singletary. I love Singletary's involvement in the receiving game last week. Put up some great numbers there. I think he had close to 60 receiving yards in that one. The rushing opportunities were pretty split with Dameon Pierce. I would love to see a bit of separation this week because then you're going to feel good about Singletary because Denver's run defense is atrocious. Dead last in the league in fantasy points allowed to the position, so could be a really exciting matchup for Singletary. My pause just comes with the split of opportunities with Pierce being healthy. 21, Jaylen Warren. Feel good about Warren. Again, we talked about the matchup. That's why, but I do like Najee Harris a little bit more, but both of these guys are going to be startable options for you against this Cardinals defense. 22, James Conner. The Steelers have definitely improved defensively, both pass and run. Still, the weakness is the run game. 16th in EPA, right around the middle of the road, but 22nd in fantasy points allowed to the position. Conner being the guy that gets all the opportunities for this rushing attack and gets some involvement in the receiving game. With Kyler Murray back, his overall effectiveness in fantasy is dinged a little bit, but still not enough here in this matchup to be outside my top 24. 23, Jerome Ford. So Kareem Hunt is someone that's getting more of the touchdown opportunities, and Ford's being that guy between the 20s, can get some involvement in the receiving game too and competing with Hunt for those. Get a top 10 defense in terms of fantasy points allowed in the Rams, 19th in EPA though against the run, so it's not an incredibly difficult matchup. I think if we should have learned anything from last week, I thought the Browns should have ran the ball far, far more because Ford ran really well against the Broncos, but just didn't get enough touches. I think he only had 9 carries and had about 65 rushing yards. I don't get it with Stefanski. We'll see who's at quarterback. That might affect what they do because they really like to throw the ball quite a bit with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Before his injury, I think he had around 25 pass attempts in like early third quarter. Don't get it. We'll see what they do here. Ford is definitely, a back-end RB2 for me with the matchup and just with the opportunity for touchdowns being a little bit of a concern. 24, Joe Mixon. Probably been wondering where he is. He's definitely someone that's fallen way back in my rankings here because of the matchup. Jacksonville, 3rd in fantasy points allowed to the position. Great run defense, but they do give up some receptions to running backs. I think the most in the league right now, so you could see Mixon save his week with that. But last week, Steelers were a good matchup, and he just did not do much of anything in that one. Going into our flex options, our guys outside the top 24, RB3s, A.J. Dillon, Kansas City defense. Some of these metrics are starting to move back, but I don't think Dillon's a super talented back, so I still think you can play him because I don't think we're going to be seeing Aaron Jones on the season. Kansas City, 14th in fantasy points allowed, 26th in EPA against the run. So Dillon can find some success, but I'm a little bit concerned about the Packers in this matchup after, getting into finding 2 big wins against the Chargers and Lions. Can they keep things going? Are people buying them at high right now? And could we see a dip here with the Chiefs having a really quality defense? I don't think the passing attack will be able to move the ball as effectively, so that might limit Dillon's opportunities for touchdowns as well because, we saw the Chargers and Lions, they really struggle against the pass. The Chiefs are not nearly the same as those two. 26, Zach Charbonnet. Don't think we'll be seeing Kenneth Walker on Thursday night. Would be shocked if we do, to be honest with you. But Dallas's defense, very, very good. 8th in fantasy points allowed, top 10 in all my major categories that I'm looking at. This is a really good run defense. The Commanders did basically nothing with their backs last week. This is why Charbonnet is a guy I said don't waste your fab adding him on the wire, because by the time Kenneth Walker's back, we're not going to have any real things to be able to take away from Charbonnet that were valuable to your team. If you started him, he's just going to be sat there and not really willing to play. But in a week where we're dealing with a lot of teams on bye, I can see having to start him in the flex spot because he's the RB1. If this Seattle team can stay in the game, there could be enough here for you to salvage maybe, a 10, 11 fantasy point game to be able to survive. 27, Dameon Pierce. I mentioned this. I kind of teased this with the Devin Singletary discussion. Look, if Pierce gets 8-9 carries, like he could be a viable flex guy when you look at the landscape of the running back position with the bye weeks this week. I think there's 6 teams on bye. Denver's that great matchup. Look, starting Pierce is ugly, but when you get a matchup against the Broncos, you could have just enough to make it worth it. 28, Brian Robinson. Miami is a really quality defense. I think Robinson is still someone you can play, but I am worried when it comes to Miami's defense. 11th in fantasy points allowed, 4th in run defense grade. This is a really good unit. And for Robinson, if we're seeing Antonio Gibson getting those receiving opportunities, like when Robinson's found the big weeks, it's because he's suddenly been able to, put together 40, 50 receiving yards. Can he do that in this game to salvage his week? We shall see. Maybe this game has a ton of points, and maybe Robinson is like a guy I'm way off on this week. If there's anyone I'm looking at my rankings, he's the guy that I think, in terms of where I have him ranked, there might be some risk in that he really explodes. But when I look at the matchup, I'm definitely worried about it. 29, Ezekiel Elliott is making my top 30 this week. That's how ugly things are. The Chargers, a good matchup. Zeke still, like, as much as Stevenson's got the majority of touches, it's not like Zeke is phased out as like a true a running back. He's definitely a 1B. So he's going to get you, maybe he could get 10 touches in this game. And against the Chargers defense, that could be enough for you. So don't feel terrible about playing him this week. 30, Tyler Algier. I mentioned Bijan being a top 5 guy for me. Algier's still getting opportunities. I think he had maybe 60 rushing yards last week. Against the Saints. The Jets are a matchup where you're going to see the positive game script likely for the Falcons, and that's going to lead to Algier getting enough opportunities to be a potential play for you in the flex spot. So don't feel terrible about Algier just because of the matchup here and the potential for volume. And there's obviously the off chance as well that you see those goal line or inside the 5 carries, because he has been seeing those this season. So there's a chance he finds the end zone too, which could really, really be huge for you this week if you have it. Now, some players that I have outside of my top 30, look, it's ugly, right? So some of these guys would be the Panthers running backs against Tampa Bay. Definitely don't want to start either one of them. They're having a heavy split between the two in terms of touches. We're getting the coaching change, so we'll see how that impacts things. But their OC was calling plays just a couple weeks ago too, so I don't think we're going to see too much of a change. And then, and again with Tampa, it's just not worth it. Jeff Wilson, you could take the chance on it. He's my RB32 on the week. Kareem Hunt in the matchup. I just, again, 2 touchdown reliant here, and the Rams defense is pretty solid. And then honestly, I have some backups like Rico Dowdle. If we see a blowout, Dowdle could get enough volume. And even so, he's getting some touches with Pollard, having a bit of a down year. Tajay Spears in the plus matchup. If you're really desperate, he's my RB36. I definitely wouldn't play him, but this is where we're at in terms of this particular week in fantasy. So if I missed anybody, if you guys want to hear about a player that I didn't talk about, definitely drop those down below in the comment section. If you have players that you're comparing between the running back position and wide receiver position at your flex spot and you want to know what I would do, definitely would love to answer your questions there in the comment section down below. But again, refer to the rankings for any decisions with your running backs this week. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.